Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the TV, mini-series, Dead Famous DNA. Now, if you ever wanted an example of how shitty corporate decision-making is in the United States, I offer you Dead Famous DNA. This is a science show hosted by a dude named Mark Evans, who presents himself as a scientist. And the idea of the show is that he is going to find the DNA of dead famous people. So people like Elvis Presley, Charles Darwin, King George III, Hitler. And he's going to sequence their DNA, or more properly, he's going to have other people who are actually competent to sequence their DNA. And then he's going to see if that DNA can tell him what made them who they were. Why were Elvis or John Lennon such good musicians? Why was Marilyn Monroe so attractive? Why was Hitler so anti-Semitic and genocidal? Now, if you have even a very basic understanding of DNA or genetics, you will probably have already spotted the problem with this, which is that DNA doesn't tell you any of those things. The whole premise of the show, what gave these people their particular talents or defining qualities, literally none of it is genetic. Like, Hitler's anti-Semitism is not a genetic condition. There is nothing that his DNA will tell you about why he committed the greatest scale human rights violation in world history. It simply isn't there. And any fucking high school educated biology student will tell you that is not what DNA does. DNA does not establish intangible qualities like talents and political perspectives. It just doesn't. It's not there. So the idea that Mark Evans is a scientist is really, really problematic right from the outset with this show. In fairness, he is a scientist of sorts. Mark Evans, I looked him up because I was confused about how, as a scientist, he might have no fucking clue what DNA actually does. And the reason, actually this is not even a good reason, but Mark Evans was a veterinarian turned TV presenter. Not a geneticist, not anybody who really has to do with DNA. There may be DNA stuff involved in veterinary science, I have no idea, but I doubt it's really the centerpiece. So they've put a guy in charge whose qualification is scientist, but actually has no particularly close relation to the question of DNA, and doesn't seem to know what DNA actually does. So there's your first really, really problematic element of the show, is just you could tell from the start, from his mission statement, that it was not going to work. You're not going to be able to, say, test DNA remains from one of John Lennon's teeth to figure out what made him such a great musician. It just doesn't work that way. DNA does not tell you that information, and scientists would be very well aware of that. So the very premise that you have a scientist promising DNA should unlock these secrets is fundamentally flawed on its face. You follow that initial failure of concept with failures of outcome. The whole show basically is just a series of Mark Evans failing to do even the most basic thing he sets out to do. There's one success and one partial success. They get a fairly reliable chain of evidence for Elvis's hair. They find a guy who was friends with Elvis's barber. That barber collected some of the hair. So they get that, and they're able to sequence Elvis's DNA. Tells them nothing about his musical ability. Shocking, I know. But what it does tell them is that he was predisposed to obesity, he was predisposed to glaucoma, he was predisposed to heart conditions, etc., etc. So the things that afflicted him later in his life and that ultimately contributed to his death did have genetic bases, which is not shocking. And that is something that DNA can tell you, and that's possibly useful information. I don't know what practical use anyone would put that to, but it tells us something about Elvis that we didn't know before. So, fair play to you, Mark Evans, I guess, for that one. And then they partially sequence Darwin's DNA, and I forget what exactly they learned that he had, but he had some sort of disease, some sort of disorder that contributed to his severe illnesses throughout his life. So again, there's a little bit of information that we do actually get, but the vast majority of this show is just failure after failure after failure. He gets this massive clump of George III's hair. Turns out it's fucking wig. It's fake. It's not even real hair. And he shelled out cash for this. He goes and he gets some of Marilyn Monroe and JFK's hair. Can't sequence it because it's been in a glass case exposed to the sun for 50 years or whatever it is. Can't fucking use it. No DNA there. And then the big one, he tries to buy John Lennon's tooth off a dude, but unless that guy gets exclusive rights to the DNA so that he can apparently clone John Lennon, the dude won't sell it. He buys one of Marlon Brando's teeth, but it's so much like a crown and so little tooth material that it's useless. But the big quest for him is to get Hitler's DNA. Like, he's weirdly obsessed with getting and sequencing Hitler's DNA. And this presents all kinds of problems. One, because Hitler and Eva Braun were killed in the bunker in 1945. She took poison, he shot himself. End of discussion. Neo-Nazis, with your fucking conspiracy theories and stupid-ass bullshit, just leave my comments section. So, Hitler and Eva Braun died in 1945. Their bodies were lit on fire. Then they were taken by the Soviets, probably. And who knows what the Soviets did with them for fucking 50 years after the end of World War II. And then who knows what happened to their bodies afterwards. So, Evans deals with this one guy who's just a fucking out-and-out neo-Nazi, anti-Semite, Holocaust-denying fuck. And he deals with this other guy who we get less information about, but he's a collector of Nazi memorabilia, which raises some really serious red flags anyway. And Evans has this whole extended fucking thing where he's like, oh, should I deal with this guy who is legit like a publicly out and out Nazi supporter, Holocaust denier, and anti-Semite? Or should I not? And the labs that he's working with, so the main lab that he's working with is actually here at Penn State. I don't know if it's at main campus or one of the branch campuses, but they say that it's a Penn State lab. And the guy at the Penn State lab is like, yeah, I'm not sequencing Hitler's DNA. None of us are. We're not. There's no scientific benefit to this that outweighs the ethical reprehensibility of doing it. So, top marks, Penn State geneticists. Well done. Fair play to you. But Mark Evans continues in his quest. He goes to a ton of different countries to contact labs to see if they will sequence Hitler and actually Eva Braun's DNA. And pretty much everybody's like, no. Not interested in doing that. We see no value in the project you're trying to do. Finally, he gets a lab in Belgium that agrees to do it. So, Mark Evans gives this fucking neo-Nazi historian $5,000 for a couple of pieces of tape with hair stuck to it, because the story is, and this guy has a photocopied letter, the story is that Hitler was so paranoid about fucking whatever idiocy he was paranoid about that he insisted when he had a haircut that all of the hairs were gathered up and burned. Hitler's barber really just wanted a fucking souvenir of the Fuhrer, so he put double-sided tape on the bottoms of his shoes and walked through the hair to secretly collect Hitler's hair. And supposedly that is what Mark Evans was buying. He buys the same fucking thing from the other guy. The fucking Nazi memorabilia enthusiast is like, hey, I've got the original letter and some hair and some tape with hair on it. So Mark Evans fucking gives this neo-Nazi historian $5,000 for this thing of hair. He gives the other guy $2,000 for his thing of hair. $7,000 gone to fucking neo-Nazis. For this bullshit. This thing that is not even going to do what he wants it to do under the best case circumstances. Then, he finally goes and he has the hair actually tested. You know what? It's not even fucking Hitler's. And you know how they know that? Because it's from fucking South Asia. This is from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or someplace like this. Somebody just fucking put some random South Asian dude's hair on tape and was like, ha, neo-Nazis, buy this, you stupid fucks. And they did, because they're idiots. And then Mark Evans bought it from them because he's a fucking idiot too. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit pissed about this whole thing, because the idea that neo-Nazis now have $7,000 for selling bullshit, fucking irritating. So that goes on. Then he meets another guy who's like, yeah, I got some bones from Hitler and Eva Braun that were smuggled out of Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed. Oh, turns out the fucking bone that's supposed to be Hitler's was also from South Asia. I don't know what's going on in South Asia, but maybe stop selling dead people's body parts as Hitler's body parts. I'm just saying. Just let's let that market die. The bone fragment from Eva Braun does turn out to be from a European woman, which does not necessarily mean it's from Eva Braun, but they are able to sequence that DNA, at least partially. They don't have a reliable chain of evidence, though. So even then, it's not clear that this really is Eva Braun's and you're really getting the information you want to get. But what they do find out, and their whole big reveal at the end of the episode, or at the end of the series, is that Eva Braun had some very, very distant Jewish ancestors. Most likely she didn't know that, but it's not really that big a reveal. They make it out to be this big thing, like, oh, Hitler, history's greatest anti-Semite, was secretly married to a Jewish woman. It's not entirely untrue, but it's also not that big a reveal, because we know that Hitler had Jewish ancestors much closer than Eva Braun would have, based on how far back in her DNA that was. So, it's there, but it doesn't add anything to history. It doesn't really tell us anything of any significance whatsoever. I would say it wasn't worth the $7,000 given to neo-Nazis, plus the costs of actually sequencing this DNA and making this program. So, if this is just a shit, worthless program full of failure and bad premises, you might very well ask yourself, why am I even making a video about it? Because actually, I think it's more interesting. The concept of the series is actually more interesting in a way than what the series itself does. Because I think it's doing what scientists actually do. Because in the sciences, hard sciences or social sciences, when you do an experiment to test a hypothesis, and that experiment fails, you still publish about it. You still write up an article explaining this was the experiment we did, it failed, here's why it failed. That's useful knowledge for scientists. Like if people want to do similar experiments, they can say, these people didn't succeed doing things this way, so we can try this and see if this is more successful. So in the sciences, that's actually useful. I think they kind of did the same thing with a TV program. They said, we've got this series of failures. Let's document it and put it on TV. The problem is, TV programs are not scientific papers. And the TV viewing community is not the scientific community. Something that makes for a good scientific paper that's actually useful for advancing knowledge does not necessarily translate into a good TV show. And that's precisely what we've got in this instance. If this were genuine failures of research, it would be good to publish. It's not good to make a TV show about. It's dumb, and it doesn't make any sense as a TV show. It just doesn't do what a TV show is supposed to do.